Not every Tom, Dick will need this. So you have to select your cases carefully. We look at tooth preparation. What do you need to make a very good prep? Go and look at a try-in. Once you have got your veneers from the lab, you have to do a try-in. Look at the cementation. The success of this restoration depends so much on cementation techniques. Then after you're cemented and the patient has gone, how do you maintain it? And then you go and look at conclusion. So, introduction. Laminate veneers, what are they? Laminate veneers, I can tell you they are very extremely thin and they are custom-made shells. These are made of porcelains or ceramics, and they are designed to cover the front surface of the teeth. And the main purpose why you put them there is to improve appearance of the patient. Patients who will come to you because of appearance, you have to consider doing laminate veneers. They're also very conservative method. Very, very conservative method. And the result, they can actually be a very good alternative to your full coverage crowns. And they're always held in place by bone. They are bone reliable surface. And they depend so much on the bone for their strength. This is a picture of the laminate veneer before cementation. These are two laminates, and these are laminates in position on the master cast. They are very technique sensitive. You have to know that, and always in direct process. That means you have to, they are made in the lab, require 2 visits. First visit, normally, you do the preparation, take impression, and then the laboratory procedures follow. After you've got the work from the lab, then you do cementation. But with the advent of CAD/CAM, you can actually do this these days in 1 visit. As you do the fabricage, you take the impression or do a scan, the patient can wait for the restoration and go back with it. You have to know that once you have cemented this, you cannot easily be repaired. Once you have looted it in the mouth, you cannot easily repair it. That's the reason why you do a try-in before you cement it. Then also you cannot change the color or modify the color once it's cemented. And then also these veneers are very, very fragile, extremely fragile. If you're careful, you have to manufacture. The few that I've done actually fractured some few. And then the bone strength. It depends so much, the strength, the bone strength between the edge enamel and the enamel actually is very, very strong. So this thing depends so much on the bone strength. So when cementing this thing, you have to very, very, very follow the procedures very, very well for it to last. And then the ethics with these things are far, far better than any bearing system compared to their direct veneering with the composite. This one actually is much, much better. Your indirect composites at times can stain. This one rarely stain. If you do a very good job, normally when it's staining, stain around the margin because of maybe in poor cementation. What are the indications? They are indicated for extreme discoloration. The extreme discoloration can be tetracycline stain. As you can see in that picture, tetracycline stain can actually be very, very bad. They also indicated for fluorosis. Those fluorosis, have to consider them, fluorosis cases, and then teeth that are darkened with age and cannot respond to bleaching. You may also have to consider doing laminate veneers. And then they also use for closing diastema. I know in our setting here, people love diastema, but in case you have a patient who would like to close his or diastema, you may consider using laminate veneers. And then they also use for malposition teeth. As you can see in this picture, they are used for malposition teeth to bring them in line. The upper picture here, you can see the malposition. You can actually use it if you want to align, restore the alignment of the teeth. Instead of using orthodontic treatment, you can actually use also veneers to align your teeth together. And then in case of wear patterns, you can actually use them in wear patterns. And this was a case I did some time back. This patient had wear patterns, upper and lower. But I used laminate veneers in this lower. You can see how it came out very well. And I can use laminate veneers to treat your wear patterns instead of doing full crown, which are non-conservative. Also consider using laminate veneers. And then they use also enamel defects at dysplasia and malformation. You have to consider using laminate veneers. And the contraindications, if the tooth or teeth are composed predominantly of dentin and cementum. As I mentioned earlier, laminate veneers depend so much on the bone for strength, and the strongest bone you can ever get is from the enamel. So if the teeth that you're working on is composed predominantly of dentin and cementum, you may not consider using them. And then they're also not indicated in deciduous teeth. Then also in axial wrapping teeth should not be subjected to veneering. And then also excessively fluoridated teeth. You need to avoid them. The reason being because these fluoridated teeth, the bone strength that you get from them are not very, very strong. So see, this will depend so much on the bone for strength. We also need to avoid them in parafunction habits like bruxism. Then how do you prepare tooth? You have selected your case, and now you want to decide to make laminate veneers. How do you go ahead with your tooth preparation? Let us first look at why do we need to prepare before we look at tooth preparation. You need to prepare the tooth because you want to get the space for veneer, space for the material, and the space for luting cements. The earlier veneers, people were putting these veneers without tooth preparation. As a result, they could get marginal problems, forget overcouturing, and the failure rate was very high. So these days, you have to prepare a tooth to give the material, the space for the luting material, for the veneer material, this porcelain or the luting cement. Also, prepare a tooth in order to get you a definite finish line. You know, most restoration fail because of marginal defects. So you want to get a very fine finish line to get a very good margin. As I mentioned earlier, I also want to prepare a tooth to get rid of that fluoride-rich layer. The fluoride-rich layer on tooth surface at times can affect the bonding. So you want to get rid of that fluoride-rich layer. And then also, studies have shown that you want to get the surface better. The more you prepare a tooth, you get a rough surface. You get better bonding when the surface is rough and a bit. So that's the reason why you want to prepare a tooth. And then there are some principles that govern the tooth preparation. First of all, the preparation must be very conservative. And then also have to note that it has to be intra-enamel, to remain intra-enamel. Don't go into dentin. And you just need to have 0.3 or 0.5 millimeters to remain that. You may ask, how do I achieve that? How do I measure that 0.3, 0.5? You're going to look at that in a moment. How you can achieve that 0.3, 0.5 and exact. You have to also note that veneers depend so much on your retention, as I mentioned earlier. And that's so much on bonding for retention. Doesn't depend on tooth preparation for retention. When you're doing your crown prep, you're told that you have to make this sort of tapper, blah, 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 make grooves so that it can retain. With the veneers, you don't depend on the preparation for retention. So it depends so much on your bone for adhesion. So that's number one reason why you have to remain within in the enamel. And then also the ideal finish line should be a slight chamfer, which you also place within enamel. And then you can do this either at the gingival crest or subgingivally. And when you're doing it in the lower mandibular incisors, can actually advisable that you keep the margin supragingivally. This is because of the lips line, because the lower lips normally covers up your margin. The upper one, the reason why you want to go subgingivally because of the smile. Normally this margin is so. What do you need to prepare tooth? You need a depth cutting bar, a depth cutting diamond. And this is the reason why I was telling you. There are these bars which are designed specifically for veneer prep. When you want to do veneers, it's advisable that you invest in these bars. These are what they call depth cutting diamond. There's number 1, then there's number 2. And the number 1 just gives you 0.3 millimeter depth cut. Whatever it cuts, just give 0.3 millimeter. And number 5 gives you 0.5 millimeter. So this is one bar you need to invest in. You also need to have what they call a 2-grit diamond. This 2-grit diamond, the reason why I call it 2-grit diamond is it has a rough part, which is for gross cutting, and then also a fine part for fine cutting to give you the margin. You just need these 2 bars. Once you have these 2 bars, you can do your veneer prep from start to finish without any other bars. If you don't have them, you can also modify other bars, but you're going to make your life easier if you have these bars at your disposal. And then there are procedures for preparation. The procedures normally follow 4 distinct aspects. It's a good idea to follow them in order. Don't jump. Good idea, you begin with a labial facial reduction, then you go to interproximal extension, then you go to circular extension, and then you go to incisal or lingual finishing. You're going to look at this one by one, beginning with the labial reduction. Using your depth cutting bars, and this help you how much, as I mentioned earlier, how much enamel to remove. If you have decided, most cases, people use 0.5, especially if you're using for anterior teeth, 0.5 millimeters. You can actually see most of this. But for mandibular incisors, which are low, mandibular incisors which are much lower, you can actually use a 0.3 millimeter depth cutting diamond. And how do you do this? These depth cutting diamond bars are placed on the distal aspect of your tooth, and we just run it across from distal to mesial. And then it gives you grooves, horizontal grooves. And these are horizontal grooves, as you can see. When running from mesial to distal, it gives you horizontal grooves, leaving uncut enamel in between. And these grooves, just the depth of this groove is just maybe 0.5 or 0.3, depending on the bars that you have selected. So leaving this enamel in between. This is an oblique view. You can see this lower part of an oblique view. Once you have run it across from mesial to distal, and you have those grooves in between. So you leave this enamel uncut, and this gauge, you roughly how much you want to remove. And then the next thing you need to do now is just to remove now the uncut enamel. Then now, you use your tooth. It has that gross part, which is coarse, and then the fine tip. And you can now use that to remove the part which is enamel which is not removed. You can see how simple it is when you have the right material. That's the reason it's emphasizing that you just need to invest in these bars. to make your life very, very, very easy. So you then use this 2-grit diamond now to remove the part which is not removed. And then this is what you get. And also advisable when removing using this 2-grit diamond to first begin with the distal part, distal half, and then you can go to the other middle half. The reason being you can use that as a control. You have to gauge how much you have removed. And also at times it's a good idea to paint the surface, label surface, so that you can know the part which is removed, part which is not removed. Remember, you are remaining in animal. So at times if you don't paint it, it's difficult to tell the part which is removed, part which is not removed. So you can begin by removing one half first. Meanwhile, you're using the other part as a control, then you can then go to the other half also. And this is the oblique view of the removed half. And then after that, you go to interproximal reduction. The interproximal reduction is just an extension of your label reduction. So utilize your 2-grit diamond bar to extend your preparation into the interproximal areas, and you extend it halfway into the contact area. But you do not break the contact. And please don't break the contact. Just go to halfway, but without breaking the contact. And the reason being this, the reason why I want to preserve the contact is because it's extremely very difficult to reproduce the contact in veneers. Extremely very, very difficult. And technicians find it very hard to produce this contact in veneers. So you want to avoid that. Then also for impression taking. Once you break the contact, the impression material may not capture those area very well. Then also simplify the try-in procedures. Once the contact is there, try-in procedure become extremely hard. And remember, these things are very, very fragile. You don't want to struggle with try-in. Once you struggle with it, it can fracture. Then also make the bonding much, much easier. And then after you have done your proximal reduction, and then you go to your sacral marginal placement, now to refine your margin that you need. You place your gingival retraction code, especially if you're place the margin subgingivally or ecogingivally, and then utilizing your 2-grit diamond, you can then refine your margin. After placing the retraction code, remember I told you earlier, this 2-grit diamond, it has a very fine tip there. The course there is very, very fine, so it gives you a very, very harmonious, definite finishing line. And that is what you need. That's what you need. You can see you have so far only utilized 2 bars. Once you have these 2 bars, as I mentioned earlier, you have sorted out. And then the next thing that you will need, after you have done that, you have go to incisal or lingual reduction. And there are 4 techniques of placing your incisal finish line, depending on whether you want to lengthen your crown, depending on whether the crown is damaged, the incisal edge is damaged or not. So there are 4 techniques that I want to mention here. You can actually make what they call a window prep. With the window prep, in this case, your incisal margin is not touched. You just make your brainier inform a window. Just like you see in A here, this is a window. Your incisal margin is not touched at all, as intact. And you can do this if there is incisal margin is intact and there's nothing wrong with it. So you want to preserve your incisal margin. Another option is what they call a feather. It's called a feather margin. Feather incisal margin is preferred if you don't want to increase your incisal length. So you can also do what they call a feather margin. And then the other one is what they call a bevel. The bevel is you end in such a way that you bevel, like in other words, you reduce your incisor a bit from bacopalatally across the fold with the preparation. And then the other one is what they call a lingual overlap. In other words, you prepare your margin, you make a bevel, but then your margin ends lingually with a chamfer margin palatally. So these are the 4 ways that you may prefer depending on what you want, but the most commonly are these: lingual overlap, and then also a bevel. Some people also use the feather, but rarely do people use a window. So depending on what you want to achieve in your preparation. And then after you have done your prep, the next thing is impression taking. The impression taking, you may need to use the traction code to expose the margin if you're not done so earlier, to give you expose the margin. And then you just use any of the silicone impression materials, the one that they use for crown and bridge, but never use alginate. You can use alginate for taking the opposing impression, for maybe for biting, all that, for articulation. But use either silicone or polyether that are normal, that give accurate impression. And then normally provisional restoration is not required. Provisional restorations are not required. Reason being, you are mainly remaining in the enamel. So true sensitivity is not an issue here. So in some cases, these patients go without provisionals, but in case they want, they can make it, but most cases, you don't need provisional restorations. So they can go, especially if you're remaining within the enamel. And then send the impression to the lab with the request, and the lab is going to send you your finished product, the veneer. And then the next thing you want to receive in the clinic, you're going to do a try-in. Try-in, you have to be very, very careful. You first try it in a model to check the margin, to check everything, to check the fit. And then you try it in the tooth, the preparation itself. And there's what they call a dry try-in and a wet try-in. A dry try-in, you have to put your veneers very carefully in your preparation to check the fit, check whether the margin fit, and check whether the contact areas are okay. This is basically check the fit. And then with a wet try-in, as I mentioned earlier, these are very extremely, very, very thin materials. And so they are almost like transparent. So the cement that you use will affect the outcome. So the cement that are meant for veneers normally come with some try-in paste. So we want to try in with the resin cement. The cement comes with try-in paste. So even the cement comes with various shades, so that we're going to use. So you try in with the paste so that you can select the right color to use. Don't agree with the patient. Remember, some of these crowns, when they come, like maybe staining, the shade is so bad, and you may not agree on a shade, on the right shade with the patient. So you try it in, not to select the right shade for the cement, for you to cement. Then once you have done that, you go to cementation. And as I mentioned earlier, laminate veneers depend on the bone strength for their intention and then strength. So the cementation steps are therefore very, very critical for the restoration. So the cementation steps What you do, the first thing is these are ceramics. So you edge the fitting surface of ceramics with hydrofluoric acid. In some cases, this is done in a lab, but in most cases, this paste, the resin kits, which also come with hydrofluoric acid. But it's good to etch this after you already tried it in. So if you have a lab in the clinic, it's very good. You can actually etch it. And hydrofluoric acid actually is very, very, very corrosive. You have to be very, very careful. Then after that, you apply a silent coupling agent on the ceramics. And this is very, very important. So like coupling agent, like a biofunctional material. It has one end which bonds into the ceramics, and then one end will bond to the resin. And then you etch the enamel with the phosphoric acid. You do not etch the enamel, the preparation with hydrofluoric acid. You etch it with the phosphoric acid. And this is number one reason why at times you need to do a prep, because in case of fluorosis, phosphoric acid may not etch the high-level fluorosis, that which is high-level fluorosis. So you etch the animal surface preparation with phosphoric acid, and then you apply your resin bonding agent to the etched enamel. Then after that, you set your restoration with the composite luting resins. You can only cement after you have tried it in, and remember, once you have cemented, there is no return. Once you have cemented and the color is not good, there is no return. Just like a plane, when the plane takes off the runway, there's no turning back. So that's why you do a try-in, so that you get everything right before you do the final cementation. And this is a cross-sectional diameter of your bonded laminate, your dentin, and then this is your etch enamel, which you have used phosphoric acid to etch, and then there you have the dentin, the enamel bonding, which is applied to etch enamel, and then you have your composite luting agent, and then the unfilled resin, then is the silent, the coupling agent, and then this is the etch porcelain. This is from outside to inside. This is a cross-sectional diameter of what you see. And once you have cemented this bond is a very, very, very strong bond. And once you have cemented it, there is no return. You can only remove it by cutting, by destroying it. And once you've done it well, it can last you for years and years. People have done studies, have shown that you give percentage, success rate is almost 95% in 10 years. That's if you do it very well. And then the next thing is maintenance. How do you maintain? Person has discharged, how do you maintain it? The success rate of air restoration depends so much on how you maintain it. So maintenance is always a combined effort of the dentist and the patient. And patients with veneers, you want to avoid using ultrasonic scalers on them as much as possible. That vibration, if you keep on using it once in a year, 2-3 times in a year on this word, they can actually also weaken that. Much as this bond is very strong, once you use ultrasonic scalers on them, with the time they can also loosen up, then they can also debond. So when doing scaling and polishing, preferably you can use hand scalers instead of ultrasonic scalers. And routinely you can do it maybe once or 2 times in a year, just to keep the margin. And then those who are not involved in sports, you want to advise them to use soft acrylic mouth guards so you can protect it in contact spot. So that is basically how you maintain it. Then, in conclusion, laminate veneers are very aesthetics. Also, they are very conservative. Option in very many indications. Success depends so much on case selections and following the right clinical procedures. You have to know that with the advent of CAD-CAM, these veneers are gaining ground. And if you're a dentist outside there and you have not done one, with the CAD-CAM, these things are becoming more predictable, easy to do. So it's worth considering it in your practice, alternative to full crowns. Thank you so much.
All right. Wow. Thank you very much, Dr. Francis Ochieng, for such a brief and very informative presentation. We have some questions here, and the first question is from Dr. Mbabali Muhammad. It says, "What advantages does veneers offer over a full crown preparation?"
Yes, what advantage does veneer offer over full crown preparation? First of all, they are very, very, very conservative. Very, very. That's actually a very strong advantage. They are very conservative compared to full crown. That is the biggest advantage you can offer us. And then secondly, that bone strength that you get, the bone strength is stronger than any other bone that you can get. So those are the main advantages that I see. But conservation of tooth structure is number one. It's key. So you don't want to go for a full crown when you can actually do veneers. Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Mbabali, welcome.
Thank you. I wanted to, you didn't read my question completely. Thank you, Dr. Francis, for a very wonderful presentation. I was looking at the vis-a-vis of because these veneers, as they are being made, they are made very thin, and the chances of breaking them is very high.
Yes.
At the time of the lab, even at the time of trying in, you can easily lose stability and it falls and then it fractures. Now that we have zirconia, which is a very strong material, even in thin layers, can't I prepare a full crown with minimal tooth destruction? Because for ceramics, you need a reasonable thickness for its strength. But zirconia, even if you have very minimum preparation, the aesthetics will come out perfect, and also you may not risk removing all the enamel. Would you still prefer a veneer to a full crown with zirconia?
Yeah, that is a very good question. Actually, even with the veneers, you can actually, the challenge with the actual zirconia has been the shade. The shade has not been, okay, that will be proved now. But you can actually also now do the veneers in zirconia. I think there's some lab with CAD-CAM actually doing it now. You can actually even do the laminate veneers with the zirconia. But still, compared to full crown, veneer will still be conservative, other than preparing that full crown. Other than providing that full crown for your zirconia. The laminate veneers will still be conservative compared to the full crown.
Okay, thank you very much for the answers. There's another question from Dr. Salima Lalali. It says, does the patient have to avoid tearing action when having veneers?
Does the patient
Does the patient have to avoid tearing action when having veneers?
Tearing action when having veneers. That is a very good question. Actually, there are certain habits that you may need to avoid. For those, depending on what tearing action you're doing, but actually they advise those one with the veneers, those one with habits of biting pens or opening up bottle with the teeth, please try to avoid that. But tearing action depending on now what you have, depending on what you are biting probably. There's certain thing you may need to avoid. Yeah.
So there is another question from Dr. David Okoya. What can be done in the absence of those tailored bars, 3 and 5 used in the preparation? Can we improve as usual in our settings?
Yes, you can improvise using, especially for those depth cutting bars, you can use round bars. Those round bars. The only challenge with it, they are time consuming. You have to gauge. The reason why you need those special bars is to help you gauge how much preparation you want to do. I mean, how much you want to remove. The reason we also want to remain so much in enamel, because if you don't have that guide, you can find yourself within the dentin without knowing. And remember, the more dentin you have, the more you compromise on the bone strength. So you can actually use some round bars to help you, but they're normally time consuming. And then also in case you don't have those true diamond, you can also use the ordinary round shaped bar. Also help. But if you have those 2 bars, they're very good. Can make your life very easy.
Okay. Then there's another question from Dr. Peter Rokon Subuga. He thanks you for the presentation and then asks if one develops irreversible pulpitis in such a tooth with a veneer, do you recommend doing a root canal without interference of the veneer?
If one normally depends so much on how your margin has ended. If you're doing it, especially on anterior teeth, you can actually not interfere with the veneer. Depending on how your margin has ended. If your margin has, you don't want to interfere with the margin in your access cavity. If you can do the root canal without interfering with your margin, then interfering with your prep, your veneer is actually very good. You can actually do it. Yeah.
Okay. Then there's another question from Dr. Alan Edward Kalyesubula. What care instructions can you give to the patient so as to avoid damaging the veneer?
What care instruction can you give to the patient? At least they should avoid those ones with habits of, there are those parafactional habits, like maybe nail biting. They recommend anyway, nail biting, and people like chewing pens. Look at literature, they normally advise them to avoid that. And then also they should actually come for maintenance to a dentist, scaling and polishing. And then when they come to a dentist, as I mentioned earlier, dentists should avoid using ultrasonic scalers. Yeah.
Okay.
And then also, they also advise, especially in the first 72 hours, depending on the looking cement that you have used, if you use a dual cure luting cement, which takes time to cure to set, I advise that you have to avoid coffee within 75 to 72 hours. Because the reason being, this thing are not set yet. And because it hasn't set, it can stain the margin. So coffee can stain the margin which are not set around the margin. The composite is not set around the margin. But if you use a light cure resin looping cement, you don't need to give that instruction. Yeah.
Okay. Then there's another question from Dr. Mariam Shahid. Great presentation, doctor. Can we give a veneer instead of a crown to a discolored tooth due to an odd error CT on an incisor?
Can you give a veneer instead of a crown? On what?
To a discolored tooth due to an odd error CT on a central incisor.
Yes, you can actually do one indication for veneers devitalized teeth, which has been done root canal, but there's a bit of controversy here. There's some school of thought which say you shouldn't use it. The reason being, I think bonding that you get from root canal to the tooth, not vital tooth, is not as strong like the one that you get from what, a vital tooth. So you can use it actually, but there's a bit of controversy. There are two schools of thought. Some people say you can do it, some people don't say don't do it because of that bone strength. Yeah.
Okay. Then there's still another question from Dr. Salim Alalani. How about tearing or biting on hard food like sugar cane or biting directly on fruits like apple?
And then also depends so much on the margin that you have used in a preparation. When you finished your margin, when you look at, let me just go back here a bit. Just a moment here. Just a moment. This you see my screen, yeah?
Yes, yeah. Okay.
When you look at this, there's finish lines. Depends so much on the preparation that you have designed in. You want to avoid tearing action when this is your finish line. You may advise the patient. Perhaps you can get the strongest bone with this one, number D, and then number A. Number A, you may want to advise them to, they can actually use tearing action number A and number D, and maybe probably C, but you want to avoid it so much when you have a further edge margin, will be number B. Depends so much on the margin that you have used in your veneers. Otherwise, if you go on tearing, biting what, be casual with your number B edge finishing, it may give way. Yeah.
Okay. So there's another question from Dr. Alan Edward Kalyesuvula. What charges or costs are recommended for veneers? Do you charge it less or more than you would charge for a full coverage crown?
Normally, the standard fee, most people actually charge 3/4 the size of the cost of a crown. The lab fee also depends on if they're using CAD/CAM, because they're now using a block. Normally, they charge you per block, depending on what, because they use one block. The one that I've inquired in town normally goes for 200,000, 250, depending on where you're doing it from. That is per veneer, because they're using a block. But normally, charge for a veneer can go for 3/4 the charge of a crown. Yeah.
I have a question, Dr. Ochieng. I wanted to request the importance of doing a veneer on a root canal to the tooth. We understand that the advantage of crowning a root canal treated tooth is not only aesthetics, but also the functional strength that comes with
yes.
So why would even someone think of a veneer only to cater for aesthetics when there is another important function of strength?
Yes, that is also one reason, because one reason why some people advocate and to discourage veneers on non-vital teeth. So there are two schools of thought. There are people who are advocating for veneers, some don't advocate for veneers. Number one reason actually people will go for a crown, because depending on how much damage, the reason why you're doing also a crown, because how much is the tooth damage? In some cases, you can treat teeth are badly damaged. If it is more than 2/3 or 1/3 of the crown structure is gone, I'll go for a crown. For a crown, not a veneer. But there are some cases where the crown is intact and just having an access cavity at the palatal aspect. Hope you get me. In that case, you can actually go for a veneer. When you just have access cavity at a particular aspect, you can actually also go for a veneer. But as I told you earlier, they have found out that actually a bone that you get from a non-vital tooth is much weaker than a bone that you get from a vital tooth. Yeah.
So, Dr. Ochieng, why don't you then say that you do not recommend a veneer?
Question.
Eh? Then, Dr. Ochieng, why don't you say that you do not recommend a veneer on a root canal treated tooth? As the champion in this field, your opinion is as good as a meta-analysis. So when you say that you wouldn't recommend a veneer on a root canal treated tooth, it is going to be taken up by us as something that we can rely on. But when you leave an option to someone,
it is something which is something which is still carrying out research on. It's not yet conclusive. Actually, trying to look at it, they're not yet so conclusive. They're still carrying out research on. So for now, you can do it, but just do it with care when doing a veneer or canal treated. Yeah, especially that's what I would say, especially if you have root canal teeth and you only have the access cavity at the back, at the palatal aspect, you can actually use the veneer on the labral aspect. But if the crown is a bit damaged, so you have access cavity, then also part with tooth is fractured, and then you rather go for a full crown. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Then there is another question from Dr. Deus Laminate. For purposes of period maintenance, would you advise gingival margins rather than subgingival margins?
For purpose of what? Period maintenance? What's the question again? What's the question? Hello?
Good evening.
I can't hear
I'm
well.
going to
What is
get it.
Who is that? Please, doctors, try to mute your audios, please.
What's the question again? I didn't get it well. I didn't get it well.
Communicate very well.
I didn't get the question well.
Yeah, for purposes of period maintenance, with subgingival margins.
You're cutting. Hello? Can
Period,
you hear me?
you don't.
Hello?
Yes, doc, I can hear you.
But would you advise what? Again, get a subgingival or supergingival?
Hello, doc.
I would use subgingival in the maxillary anterior. Maxillary anterior, if this is because of aesthetics, because at times that margin may show, so you may want to use subgingival in the maxillary incisors. But then for the lower mandibular incisors, you can actually keep it supragingival. This is because of aesthetics. Keep it supragingival as much as possible. There is no need to go subgingival in the mandibular incisors. Yeah.
Okay. Then, doctor, I have a question.
Yes.
I
can't hear you.
Why
I can't hear. I didn't hear. What is it?
Why laminated DT?
Can
you hear me, doc, now?
Yes. Okay. What are you saying?
Can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you now.
Okay.
It's cutting again.
Why are laminate veneers? Why are laminate veneers?
I've missed it again.
Okay. Can you hear me now, Doc? Hello.
I can't hear well.
Now? Hello, Doc. Can you hear me now?
It's cutting. I can't hear well. I don't know what you are asking. I didn't hear what you're asking.
Okay. Now, can you hear me?
Hello? Hello? It's gone. Hello?
Hello, now?
Hello? I can't hear.
Hello. I think, Doctor.
Yes, I can't hear well. Can you type the question down?
Okay, let me type.
Let me see. Hello? Can you hear me?
Doctor, I've typed it.
Yes, Dr. Cheng, we can hear you.
Okay, what is the question again?
They've typed the questions in the chat.
Is this one from Kwezera?
Doctor, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, why are laminate veneers contraindicated in excessive pollinated teeth?
Yes, excessive pollinated teeth. The reason actually being because they have found out that you cannot get a very, very good bonding because laminate veneers depend so much on the bone for that strength. So with excessive pollinated teeth, you can actually not get a very good bone. You can't, that bone strength that you get from pollinated teeth are not very, very strong enough to last for long. That's why they're contraindicated. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I lost the chat. Can you please read another question down there?
From where I just see the one that I've just answered. How about lower fluorosis? Lower the fluorosis. Oh, I can't get it so well.
Hello.
Hello. Yes. How about lower with fluorosis? Fluorosis. If there is fluorosis which is excessive, you may need to consider some other options. Maybe crown. Hello?
Any more questions?
Hello?
I think there's a problem.
Network.
Is there any more questions? Yes. Hello.
Network.
Dr. Ochieng, can you hear me?
Is cutting. Hello? If you're hearing me, I cannot hear you.
Dr. Ochieng, we can hear you, but some people's network is very poor. We can't hear anything.
Hey.
Hello.
He's talking, but I can't hear him.
There's a network problem. I think, can you hear me now? I don't know what the problem is, my network, but I think there are no more questions.
Hello, Dr. Chen.
Yes. I can't hear him. He's talking.
Yeah, his network is bad,
Yeah.
but I think he had exhausted all the questions that
Okay.
we were asking.
Okay.
Did anyone hearing? Did he miss out any? I think he read most all of them in the chat.
Okay.
Yes. Otherwise, thank you so much for the presentation.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes, Doctor.
Sorry, the network was very, very poor, especially when I was speaking. I couldn't hear most of the things he was talking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you all for attending.